Hello, you are looking at an air-powered rifle from the 1700s. Pretty cool. I didn't know those existed, and that got me interested in the subject, and more importantly, I'm not much of a gun guy, but I know a lot of people who are, and they didn't know anything about these either, so I thought that was particularly interesting and worthy of a little attention. The earliest air gun in existence, the one that's considered kind of the oldest existing, is from 1580, so how amazing is that? And it's of a configuration called a spring rifle or piston. So basically, there's a mechanism, like spring powered, as you can imagine, that compresses the air in the cylinder already. So you're not carrying around compressed air and attaching it to the gun. This one here, meanwhile, obviously has the air attached in the butt of the rifle, and that's why it has that cylindrical shape, just like the last one that we saw. So you have two basic configurations. Kind of seems like the original is more they also call it a bellows-based rifle, where it's, somewhere in there it's squeezing the air, versus you doing that separately and then attaching the reservoir to the gun. So you've got this new technology, you've got a new kind of gun, but what do you use it for? Originally this was kind of a rich person's toy, and it was a hunting weapon, but a very effective one. It was used on deer, wild boar, so big game, could bring them down in one shot. So power-wise, it's definitely got the job done. The really surprising part is how many advantages this has over traditional firearms of the time when it comes to other functionality. These did not give away your location via smoke, noise, or flash, for one thing, so that's pretty impressive. And another is many of them were repeaters, so you could fire off a lot of shots, which you could not do at all with traditional firearms of the time, right? Gunpowder based. Not even close. And that right there gives you a ton of advantages, but another one is you could use it in wet or weather. So a lot of times you couldn't do that with other guns at the time because you had to light a fuse and that kind of thing. And you're no doubt wondering what you're looking at here, right? So this is a ball reservoir. Isn't that crazy looking? It looks like something out of a steampunk, imagination. But no, this was real. So there was the canister. And you even had pistols like this. I don't have a picture of those that I could use easily. So think about that. There's a pistol with that crazy sphere attached to it. But again, they worked and really worked quite well. Here's the other side. So you can see, again, we talked about this being a rich man's item, and you can see this is like a fine firearm. I shouldn't call it a firearm, but a fine weapon, right? This is not a poor man's implement at all. Now, I'm sure you recall the list of advantages this has, the impressive list of advantages it has over firearms of the day, so it would make you wonder, why was this used for hunting but not war? Well, it was. The Austrian army had a one made for them, a configuration called the Girondoni. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sounds Italian, but it was for the Austrian army, and that's the really famous type from this time frame. This was very popular. It was the kind that was carried in the Lewis and Clark expedition, which we'll talk about in a second. You can see here a Japanese model. Japanese started making it around 1820 versions of their own, and you can see it's the same basic configuration with the cylindrical reservoir. Here you can see how it works, right? How the reservoir detaches and attaches. And if you notice with the ball reservoir, it's the same thing. Those threads, you just screw it in place. But back to the military model, how's this for amazing? That rifle could empty its 22 shots in about 30 seconds. And think about like the American Revolution or any other kind of warfare Napoleonic of the time. And it's not hard to understand how vastly superior this really is. And how about this one here? Pretty impressive, right? And this is important because, one, it shows you the variation, that you can see in these, but also notice this is not easily identifiable. There's not a ball reservoir. The butt of the rifle is shaped traditionally. It's not that cylinder, so it doesn't stand out. But this is actually an air rifle. And the same can be said for pistols. So when it's a ball reservoir pistol, it's really easy to, note that it's a air-powered gun. But if it's a reservoir in the handle, I guess a handgun has a butt as well, then you might not notice it right away. You might, on closer inspection, realize there's something a little strange about the end of the gun here, the part you hold, the handgun, and it's because it's shaped so that it can hold enough air to power the ammo. Anyone old enough in America certainly remembers Daisy air rifles. I think that was probably the most famous maker here. And you had the same thing in Europe. You had different ones. So the Diana air guns were quite popular. That was a German company, and they're made from the 1890s all the way past World War II. And speaking of Daisy, here's one, which I thought was pretty funny. I just like the style that they went with there. Now that I'm on an American one, I might as well jump over to Lewis and Clark. So that's the most notable instance in American history of an air gun. They took a Girondoni version with them on their famous expedition, and they used it for two purposes. One was to hunt, it was very effective, but the other one was to impress Native Americans, right? Which it did. They made a point of almost always demonstrating it for the tribes that they met, and it made a great impression. It even got a name. It was called the Smokeless Bolt of Thunder, which is pretty awesome. And you can only imagine how mind-blowing that must have been to see almost a round per second coming out of a, what to them would have been, firearm, or just really unthinkable. Now, what those Native Americans didn't see was the preparation. It took an estimated 1,500 hand pumps to pressurize a canister like the one that we're looking at here. That's cast iron covered in leather, by the way. So think about the amount of time that would take and the amount of work. We've talked a lot about the advantages these weapons had over their competitors, but now you can see the real problem. So as you can imagine, the logistics around that and the price, remember these were expensive, equal these just not being used on a very wide scale in warfare. Now, there were teams of snipers in Europe that utilized these, and you can imagine why, right, given the list of advantages we talked about. But that was just a drag that you could not get around. You could carry multiple tanks, that wouldn't be easy, and even if you had another one, or maybe another one after that, a total of 3, once you were done firing, the weapon was essentially useless. Lastly, I'm going to throw in the one bit of unique research I have here. Everything else was just, passed on from other sources about air guns, but I tripped over something entirely different. We think of air guns as being basically toys nowadays, and certainly, like in my childhood, that's what they were thought of, how they were marketed. And as we can see, there were serious weapons, hunting weapons, and warfare weapons in the past, centuries ago, but they were toys then as well. And I know that because in researching European carnival folk traditions, I came across in like the 17 and 1800s people using air rifles to just shoot soot and ash onto the onlookers' faces. And that is it for the original air guns. I hope you found a lot of that surprising. I certainly did when I first came across it. Thanks.